Alrighty, everybody. Hello, hi, and welcome back to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and the TV show isn't the only thing that's chaotic. So today we'll be discussing episode 4 over Under Rest Asunder. So grab a snack, start your laundry, or do whatever, and we'll dive in. Now, first of all, I want to start this episode saying I did have to look up what the word asunder meant, and it means divided. Over Under Rest Asunder, over under rest divided. The rest are divided. And that really talks about what this episode is about, the overworld, the underworld, and the rest are divided. So crazy. I just think it was a fun little title. And with that, let's talk about our episode summary. So this episode is about Herculeon, and he overhears Tom and Kaz arguing over who's better, the underworld or the overworld. Let's talk about it. Herculeon, he's hurt. He's got a horse in this race for sure. Absolutely he does. And he says, Kaz, I challenge you to a battledrome battle. And so this is our first challenge. And so they battle. While they're battling, we get a little commentary from Peyton and Sarah, who are telling us the backstory of the Gothica and how that divided the overworld and the underworld. In the end, Kaz loses his match, and that's pretty much the episode. So, analysis. There's really no A story, B story here. You could argue that Tom learning about the Gothica is a B story, but I just think it's so central to the central story that it is actually just the A story. And you can disagree with me, but that's what I'm saying. However, it does add complexity to the narrative in a new way. So take that what you want. Like, it's giving B story because it's about something different and it like adds complexity to the narrative in a new way. But it's just so much the A story. Like, I just think like this episode is like we're watching sports, and when you're watching sports, you have conversations with your friends, and they're not always directly talking about the match, but like this one is. It's like tangentially associated, and so I don't know. To me, like the point of this episode is like we're watching sports and we're talking while we're watching sports, not necessarily like this is Kaz versus what's his name, Herculeon. This is Kaz versus Herculeon, and this is the story. It's like, nah, we're watching this battle, and so take that how you will. But I have to talk about Herculeon. I have to talk about Herculeon, and he's so silly because Herculeon is meant to be a foil to Kaz, and a foil is meant to have similarities in order to highlight the difference between two characters. Think Romeo and Juliet, you have your Benvolio versus your Tybalt. Your Benvolio, Bene means good, Tybalt, the fighter, whatever. So that's an example. But they're foils, so they're both chaotic players, just one likes the overworld, one likes the underworld, highlighting the differences. But they also weave that into their character design because they both have spiky hair that flags the color of what team they support, right? So Kaz, he has his iconic red hair, and so obviously he roots for the underworld. But Leon, he has iconic blue hair. You know what I mean? He is flagging for the overworld. And whereas red is a natural color, blue is not a natural color. He wanted to do that. um, but they're both spiky. Like they're very similar hairstyles. They're just different colors. They also both have cargo bottoms. Kaz is wearing pants. Leon. Herculeon is wearing shorts. Whatever, they're similar in that way. And I do think Leon is intended to be a little bit cooler than Kaz. He's wearing a graphic tee V-neck, which very of the time, early 2000s, people loved a V-neck, and, they're allowed to. Me as a person, I'm happy we've grown out of that era for men's men's fashion. But these characters look similar enough to warrant comparison, and I think the foil really emphasizes, like, Kaz loves the underworld in, like, an earnest and nerdy way. He he can't stop talking about it. He just loves it so much. It's like me and Chaotic. But Leon loves the overworlders in a way that's like egotistical. it's like in a superiority complex kind of way. Like he's like, I love, like I'm the best, and I love the best things, and therefore everything I love is the best, and the overworlds are better because I like them. I don't know. It just rubs you the wrong way. But the other way that we can compare them is track record. Herculeon is, ooh, he's rumored to be an undefeated player, and this is the first time we see Kaz in a battle, and so at the end of the episode, the track records for all our main characters are we have Peyton 1 win, Tom has 1 win, 1 loss, and at the end of this episode, Kaz has 1 loss. And so I think we're meant to perceive these characters through their skill level to some extent, and through their level, meaning through their track record. So we leave this episode feeling as though Kaz is an underdog. Um, he loves the game, but maybe he's not the best at it. And we've established Peyton as this good player because he has strategy and he only wins. Whereas Tom, our self-insert character, he's very balanced. He has 1 win, 1 loss. We could win, we could lose. Wow. Okay. Right, that's a point of comparison between Herculeon and Kaz. Kaz is meant to be this underdog player, and Herculeon is undefeated, right? But thematically, we get the lessons learned from Overworld Underworld division more subtly through the match than we do like through the overt stories. But we get to learn about like their special abilities and strategy. So like there is this theme of strategy, like, it's a show about a game, and so in order to play the game, you have to play the game and you have to think about the game and you have to be strategic, blah blah blah. um, but you have to be strategic. And so Kaz uses Takinam's sacrifice, and Herculeon uses like Tartarex switching places. Like expositionally, this is how we learn about special abilities from the characters. Like each character has their own special ability that's able to be used for strategic reasons. And so I think there's like a didactic, educational aspect to this episode where, like, yes, we're watching an episode for fun and it's a fun battle, but it's also like we're learning something. We're learning that these these characters they're all different, and they all have different things that make them unique and special and good to play with. It, leans for strategy. But structurally, from a narrative perspective, Takinam's special ability, her sacrificing her teammates, gives us a consistent character to root for. It gives us like a protagonist character, and it makes it easy to remember as an audience member who the protagonist is in this episode. Like through all three of these battles, we are rooting for Takinam, and that's it's kind of interesting because it juxtaposes the first time we see Takinam is in that first episode where she's our villain character, and it contributes to the like main emotional theme of the episode, which is like there's no right side to the overworld underworld conflicts. It's just two varying perspectives, and the good evil rhetoric is just propaganda. But like having Takinam be in the protagonist like seat for this episode, it maintains that balance of like we saw her once as a villain, now we're seeing her once as a hero. It's like how in the last episode, episode 3, we have like the Blazer spy dynamic versus Kaor, and we have the Nothalax spy dynamic versus Mesmar. There's there's a balance there. We see them both in the like good position once, and we see them both in like the bad position once, right? So it keeps it balanced from like a structural perspective. And then we also see this rule of 3 again, where you have to tell your audience something like 3 times in different ways for them to fully grasp a concept. And so establishing the overworld underworld as enemies happens like multiple times throughout this episode. So in the beginning, you have that beginning argument of like, oh, this is just a fun argument between friends. The overworlders are better. No, the underworlds are better. Blah blah blah. And we also get Sarah's and Peyton's stories respectively of like, the overworlders are greedy, and no, the underworlders are greedy. And so we get that like 2 more times. But then we also get like pretty explicit exposition given by Codemaster Krellin in this episode, like before they battle, he was like, "You know what? I'm gonna frame this battle for the people at home. We have overworlders versus underworlders, two two tribes, both alike in dignity, but, star-crossed nonetheless. Back to our Romeo and Juliet reference. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, this is a battle for the ages because they hate each other. Okay, Codemaster Krellin, like, they need to pay you more, I guess. And so that leads us into the lore, which, of course, is the main thing we learn about this episode is the overworld-underworld conflict and also the Kothika. From Peyton's story, we get, like, Kothika is the source of energy in Param. And so everybody lived in peace because the Kothika fulfilled their needs but like it was found in the underworld. And so the Kothika lives in the underworld, but the underworlders got greedy and they wanted to keep it for themselves. And he gets interrupted. And then later we get Sarah's story of the Kothika is the source of energy in Param. It's found in the overworld. And everyone lived in peace because the Kothika fulfilled their needs until the overworlds got high and mighty over how it should be used. And whoever disagreed with that is the bad guy, right? And so right away, from these two different varying perspectives, we get the rhetoric against each side. The underworlders are labeled as greedy, and the overworlders are labeled as high and mighty. And so we think, okay, so maybe they think themselves as morally or intellectually superior, like they know what's better, they're high and mighty. It's just an interesting thing to see right away. And then we see this difference in the way overworlders and underworlders like game mechanics work and how that supports the culture of each tribe. So the overworlders are labeled as teamwork. They use teamwork to become stronger. They strengthen the group. And the underworlders have a survival of the fittest mentality, which is through like Takinam's sacrifice. She's like sacrificing her other creatures to make her stronger, which is kind of it's like an individualist culture versus a collectivist culture. So the overworlders are labeled as this collectivist culture where they use teamwork to lift everybody up, whereas the underworlders are labeled as more of an individualistic culture where, you have to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. The bootstraps. Boots. And here's the thing. We don't really know what caused the conflict between the two tribes. We just get two different versions of history. Each history was written by like a different side, and as we know, history is written by like the winners. And so, you can't really trust the perspective of either tribe because they're both biased, right? They're both propaganda. And we get Peyton using the word propaganda in this episode too, which I think is interesting and relevant. And what I also think this is one of the reasons I love Chaotic is because of like it introduces these political aspects. But what's also really relevant right now is like the Wicked movie. It came out in November, and part two is going to come out this November. And but something about Wicked is like this is also the theme of Wicked is like you don't really know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Um, which, it's much more complex and nuanced, but we're not talking about Wicked, except we are, because some of the best bars in Wicked, like I this is like the whole point of Wicked is in the song Wonderful, which will be in part two. The wizard sings, "A man's called a traitor or a liberator, a rich man's a thief or philanthropist, is one a crusader or ruthless invader, is all in which label is able to persist. There are precious feudities and moral ambiguities, and so we act as if they don't exist. Why? Because it feels wonderful." Oh, that wonderful Wizard of Oz. And that was a direct quote. Yes, I do have those lyrics memorized. Thank you very much. You will not see seeing me on stage one day. But like those those lyrics are just bars. And I think it really encapsulates the vibe that like Wicked has and also that like this episode has of how do you know who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? Through empathy and or propaganda, It's all in which label is able to persist. So there are precious feudities and moral ambiguities. But like the moral ambiguities are because these two different sides have two different stories. And so they're trying to push which label is able to persist. Who's like they're both trying to control the narrative, right? And they're both failing. They're both failing to control the narrative, except they're succeeding in their own region, right? But at Chaotic, this like third party, it's like a game, right? But this is real for the creatures of Param. But Any excuse to say, is a man called a traitor or liberator, a rich man's a thief or a philanthropist, is one a crusader or ruthless invader, is all in which label is able to persist. There are precious feudities and moral ambiguities, and so we act as if they don't exist. Any reason to say that, I will say it. I'll take any chance I can get. But like in the end of the episode, they say like it's good versus evil, but who's who? And I think that's such a good way to like wrap up this episode because who is who? And structurally, Chaotic is intending for us to not know. Like they're rhetorically asking that question because there isn't an answer. We don't know who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. They're just two different groups who are at odds, right? And I think it's a poignant lesson, but it's also put in such an age appropriate way for like this children's TV show that it's teaching you about empathy. It's like how do you put yourself in somebody else's shoes and see their perspective? Because who's good and who's evil, we don't know. We don't know. But the characters of Param think they know, but we don't. You know, how do you take sides? You don't, right? Like this isn't you don't have a horse in this race, you know? And so something I think is interesting is specifically in this episode they use Kaz as like our protagonist, and he roots for the underworld, which is another way to add balance because the underworlders are visually and artistically they're more demonic in nature. Like they're kind of associated with like this hellfire. They live under the earth and they have horns and they're fire creatures. We're rooting for these demonic characters, but then they also make the more palatable characters um, the villains of the episode, the antagonists, right? We all know what a turtle looks like. Like we see Tartarak and we're like, that is a turtle, you know, that we associate with him. Whereas Takinam, we're like, that's a dragon girl demon thing, you know. But like, you see the turtle and you're like, yay, it's a turtle who's old and has a staff, right? But the more palatable character is in the villain position, and it just brings balance. And to be honest, this is one of the reasons why I love Chaotic, is of like because of the toolbox. Like the world that lives in my head is like the chaotic that lives in my head is like geopolitics related, and they put it in such an age appropriate way, so that kids can like use these characters as tools and like play pretend and like figure out their own beliefs based off of the narratives and these characters, right? They're adding tools to the toolbox, right? Like I remember I saw a TikTok that like a dad was playing with his daughter, like, and they were playing dolls, and it was the kingdom fairy princess was, she was the leader of the world, and the dad was playing like I don't know, I don't want to say peasant, but he was like playing the concerned citizen, bringing up needs to the daughter. And he was like, "Oh, we have all of these people who want to come to our land because like their land is being destroyed. Should we let them in or should we turn them away?" And what they were practicing was like stances on immigration, right? But he was doing so in an age appropriate way through play. And I think that's like what Chaotic does. They introduce like empathy and like propaganda in an age appropriate way for kids to start to grasp. And I just, it's so interesting. It's so interesting. So I also want to note Mapedians more regularly side with overworlders, and Danians more regularly side with underworlders. And so this is a fun way of the way that the narratives were set up. Sarah, the Ardanian queen, aligns more with the pro underworld side, and Peyton, who's the Mapedian lover, aligns more with the pro overworld side, which aligns with the way that their tribes also align politically. But it's not just like politically, it's like geopolitically. Because when you think about the map of Param, which I understand, I swear I get it. But I am going to say the exact opposite thing of what I just said. I don't really understand the map of Param, but from what I can understand, right, you have the overworld, which is named the overworld because it is above, right? We are above. And the underworlder live in the underworld, which is below. They live below the land, right? So we have a very clear like above below mentality here. And we know later we learn they're separated like through the passage, like the underworlders live underground. But the reason why the Danians align with the underworlders is because they also live underground, right? And Mepedians also live above the ground. They live in the desert, up, like, and sure, there's still like there's conflicts between all four tribes, and we haven't exactly explored that in the TV show narrative yet, but it is like it's geopolitics. I just like the way. Sorry about that. I just had a work call, so I don't know where my recording cut off. But we were talking about the geopolitics of Param and how the Danians align with the underworld because they are in the underworld, right? And I know this because, and I had to do a little bit of research for this, but I was like, in my head, I know they're underground because of the pillars. The pillars. And there are pillars in the underworld. But also, where the Danians live is called Mount Pillar, right? It is a pillar. And so I was like, the pillars are like the load-bearing walls of the underworld. It's what keeps the overworld above and not all come crashing down. It keeps them separated. And so I found, like, I was looking up pillars in the chaotic lore. The Mount Pillar card itself says the Danian homeland provides vital structural support to the overworld ceiling, explaining why Kaor has resisted its demolition, right? And it just all the puzzle pieces fell into place, right? Like that's the reason why the Danians align with the Underworlders is because like structural support. Like if the Danians weren't there, like the sky would come crashing down. And so sure they have their kerfuffles, but right, like it's not worth ending their world over. It's not worth the demolition of the underworld, right? And so like sure the overworlders and the Mepedians have their kerfuffles, but it's not worth like you know, it's not worth the world. So, on to my fun facts and other notes section. This is the first episode since the first episode that has no last time on Chaotic. Um, we just start the episode and we have a theme song and it's fun, right? On this episode, I also noticed that they love to like tease a character before the character enters. Like in episode one, we had that like dramatic pan of glacier plains and Maxor grunting with silhouettes and it was like artistic or whatever. And in this episode we see like Herculeon's hand and then we see his feet and then we see his like shadow on Kaz's back before they're like poof it's Herculeon. You know what I mean? And it's just a pattern that I've noticed. I think I don't remember if they did it with Hearing too. Um but it was like before they introduce a character, they like build it up. And I just think that's funny. Another thing I noticed from this episode is like the animation. So this is Flash animation, I believe. Um, I don't know all of the ins and outs of animation, but I believe the animation style here is called Flash animation, where they have like a puppet, um, and they, make the characters move. And because of this, I noticed we don't get high angles or low angles on the characters because of like all of their puppets have to be flat to the fourth wall of the screen. And so what's interesting is like they do give us interesting angles. Like we have a top down angle where somebody's on the ground and we get like high low angles of the background, but the way they position the characters is always flat to the front of the screen. You know what I mean? It's flat to the fourth wall. And I think that's interesting. And they say limitation fosters creativity, and so you do see a lot of like really creative shots that they do with the puppets, except the puppets are just always flat. Like, and you have their side characters and you have their front and back um, are options, but like in like film class, they teach you if you have a low angle, like that character is in power, and if you have a high angle, that's like diminishing the power of that character to some extent. And like those options just like aren't available in this style of animation, which I think is interesting and intriguing. And so if any of you know more about Flash animation, I would love to hear it. And finally, this is the first time we see Tartarak. He comes back, and Heptad, of course, too. This is really the first time they get to showcase overworld creatures in the Drome. Like, we've had Maxor a couple times, and, that's Tom's favorite. We love him. But because it's not Tom playing, they show off Heptad, Tartarak, and what's the third one in this episode? Is it Crustaceous or whatever his name is? The crab guy, I think is the other one in this episode. But so we get three new overworld characters. The only other times we see the overworld characters are we got Mesmar and Blazer, right? So now we've met six overworld characters, whereas Underworld, we've met Hearing, we've met Hallmar, we've met Kaor, we've met Takinam, and then is that it? I don't know. I guess we'll have to keep track. Somebody else can if you want to. But I think it's interesting they introduce Tartarik and Heptad in the Battledrome, and they both come back later. Heptad, of course, later, and Tartarik, of course, later. And I'm not gonna spoil that for you. Tee. But so final thoughts on this episode. I really like this episode. Even though there's like really no B plot for me, I think it's a realistic way of like watching sports where you have conversations in between the plays and that are like tangentially. Let me decide to say that word right. Can somebody help me with that? Um, you have conversations that are connected to the game in some way, but are not about the game. They're related. You know what I mean? And so tangent line, tangentially. I don't know. But I really like this episode. Um, for those reasons, but I also think it gives audience members a lot to think about in terms of theme. Like, this is an episode where you watch it and you walk away and you think. The theme is like broad, it's applicable. Like, the vilification of groups due to perceived differences or unclear history is just, it's something that, like, it's so broad and unspecific that it is very applicable to different things. And I think that's the work of the viewer to apply it to the real life. They're telling you these lessons with Param, but I think it's your job as the viewer to figure out, like, am I holding these biases in real life? And so that's all I have to say. This is I out of the episodes so far, this might be my favorite. Episode 4 for the win. And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.